This is a really fun episode of the Conscious Entrepreneur Show because I get the chance to talk to my sister, Dr. Meggie Mapes. She's a professor of communication. She's the author of the public speaking textbook Speak Out, Public Speaking as Advocacy, which is an award-winning textbook. And she's the founder of Meggie Mapes LLC, where she does strategic communication and public speaking coaching for entrepreneurs, business leaders, politicians, and organizations. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Entrepreneur Show. My name is Michael Mapes. I help people get more clients and make more money so that they can live their vision. And if you've listened before, you know that I always have three intentions for this show. Number one is that I want to build trust. I want you to get to know me, and I want you to get to know my guests and see if we might be able to provide some value to you. Secondly, is that I want to help you grow your business. So if you walk away with 1, 2, 3 strategies to do that, the important thing is that you take action on them. And then the third thing is that we want to over deliver on value. So I hope that you find something in here that's useful to you and that's really, really valuable. So that's my intention for the show. I'm excited today because we have Dr. Meggie Mapes, who you might notice from the last name is my sister. But she's also a renowned author, a public speaking expert, and a professor of communication at the University of Kansas, who has a passion for creating major strategic communication wins. She's poised to empower individuals and organizations alike, propelling them towards a more diverse and inclusive culture. I could go on and on because this is a woman who has done truly so much. If you can only get to know one sibling, I do recommend her with me as a second choice. But there's really so much that she's done, and we're going to dive into all of that today because Meggie's up to a lot of cool things in a lot of diverse areas. And I know that she's going to have some incredibly valuable insight to share with you, especially when it comes to the area of public speaking. And we often know, right, that people would rather die than speak in public. They'd rather watch their house burn down in a fire than do that. But it is such an important thing. So Meggie, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I will disagree about which sibling to know first. Oftentimes we come in a pair, I think, a nice balance, which we'll probably talk about today as well. Very happy to be here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So I want to ask you, we'll talk later about like your academic career and some of like what led you there. But since the show is called since the show is called The Conscious Entrepreneur, I want to ask you, like, how did you get into actually forming like Meggie Mapes LLC? Like, how did you go from I teach public speaking, I'm a researcher, I do this, I'm a great dog mom. How did you go from that to I want to launch this as like a business?
Question. And part of the answer is you bugging me for years and years and years. I think one difficult part that I had is I had never envisioned myself as owning, as doing any consulting work, as being an entrepreneur. Because when you think about a more traditional academic line or kind of academic storyline, if you will, in my experience, I hadn't encountered folks who were doing any of that outside additional industry-based work, which doesn't mean there aren't folks that do it, but I wasn't familiar with it. So it required me to have access to someone like you who did coaching for entrepreneurs to be able to create a new narrative for me to see that, in fact, there are possibilities to be able to add value to other people, especially if you really believe, like I did, about what I was teaching. So one is just having that exposure and having someone who's able to show you that it's possible to give you that confidence to determine whether or not that outcome would be beneficial. And so I determined it would, partially by your support. But the other thing is I started getting some organic opportunities, which I was lucky to get about public speaking through my line as a faculty member. People began asking me questions about public speaking resources, if there were coaching opportunities that I could provide. I'd already been doing that, of course, informally and formally in my academic job. But those kind of solicited requests made me realize that there was a huge need, not just generally for public speaking training, but also really specifically for public speaking training for women and folks who oftentimes find themselves to be positioned as less empowered, or they're looking for opportunities to be more empowered in their organization or even just in their daily life. So kind of some of those organic opportunities, and then also that support from you to be able to kind of take that next step.
Such a great point. And I think that one of the things it's like that, if you want to start a business or if you're struggling in terms of like the marketing in your business, one of the things that you want to pay attention to is like, what are people always coming to you for, right? Like, are they always coming to you for advice about a certain thing? Are they always complimenting you? Like maybe you have a really great sense of style, and like every time that you go out, people are complimenting you on, kind of like your fashion sense or whatever. Maybe you are always that person that people go to talk about their love life. Maybe you're the one that somebody goes to ask like about what's the newest restaurant art opening. Like maybe you have some kind of sense event wise of what's going on. So like pay attention to kind of what people are already asking you to do, because there can be so much opportunity in that.
Absolutely. People are observing things that you might not know about yourself necessarily. And I also thought it was important for me to ask, like, what do I like to do? What are the things that I'm enjoying? And so I like to teach, but a struggle with teaching is that you are working with a large cohort of students. So opening my own business allowed me to really say, what do I want teaching to look like outside of that specific context? If I'm interested in coaching one-on-one, for example, I am often limited because of those kind of student enrollment caps, of course. So I'm able to create the conditions that I can do the thing I like in the way that I can do it, knowing that it will add value to other people.
What would you say? So let's talk about that for a minute. So we've got, and I encourage you to check out Maggie's award-winning open access public speaking textbook. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes for this. So, because I do think, there's some great found just fundamentals in there for people, really kind of breaks it down. And I'm not meaning to imply that it's basic, because it's not. I really like the way that you frame things. But so you're working with people in this sort of academic context, teaching them public speaking, teaching them sort of about maybe some concepts in strategic communication, teaching them about research, all of this. And you've got like, one kind of goal, you have one set of goals over here that you're trying to get these people to achieve. So what's the difference like between public speaking that you might teach in like your public speaking class and public speaking in terms of like how an entrepreneur might use it in their business, or is there a difference?
That's a good question. And some of it depends on where the student and the entrepreneur are in their like life and even in their career life cycle. One difficulty when you're dealing with a more traditional student base, which I would say, 18 to 24, especially in the US where folks are going straight from high school into college and their first year they might be taking a class with me about public speaking, is that I'm often asking them to imagine contexts where these skill sets would be useful. So we're still doing them, we're still applying, but we're kind of asking to imagine the context of a classroom be a context that they could see themselves giving public speeches in. Where oftentimes when you're working with other
For example,
entrepreneurs,
persuade this audience about this
exactly,
topic, or
exactly. Or even like, hey, pretend you're going to give a toast, right?
yeah,
Something that you
right.
might do. We're kind of imagining, which can actually be kind of tricky or difficult. But when you're dealing with an entrepreneur, it's much more this is the context I am in. Here's what I'm noticing. And in that regard, I'm having to do a lot less work convincing them about the necessity of having those skills. Most of the time, if you look around, people can name folks that they think are really great public speakers and why they view them as, mentors or models or, things that they want to progress, move towards. I'm doing much less explaining the utility of becoming a better public speaker. And I'm doing a lot more, let's look at your context and let's look at you as a person to figure out what strengths, what opportunities you already have and what are kind of barriers that you feel like are prohibiting you from becoming that kind of ideal speaker in the context that you're given. So in that regard, it can feel a lot more materially impactful for an entrepreneur because they're able to go to a networking session, for example, and really apply a few very basic techniques to get them practicing some of those communication skills that we're working on, as opposed to, again, asking those students to imagine that they can then apply those in the future. Both are still important or necessary. They're just kind of dealing and approaching it in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And also, as you say, the audience is real, and thus the way that the communication is crafted can be tailored quite specifically to all of these constraints, which are not artificial in some sense, but are actually the constraints that will be applied. For example, you can sell from the stage here, you can't sell from the stage here, right? You
Yes,
can collect people's email addresses, you can't collect people's email addresses, right? And I think,
absolutely.
or a TED talk, right? We've got 15 minutes, we're going to hit these kind of major beats. In terms of like errors that people make. Like, I wonder if there's some crossover here between the kind of errors that people make, like in your class when they're preparing to give one of these speeches, even if the context is somewhat,
Mhm.
contrived, and the errors that people make when they go to speak in public. And I like that you said too, it's like we could be talking about speaking for 30 seconds at a networking meeting. We could be talking for 30 minutes or three, it's like, so I'm interested in if there's some kind of common errors that people are making that kind of prohibit them from getting the result that they want.
Absolutely. I think there are two that come to mind initially. The first is a lot of people subscribe to the narrative that public speaking is something that you're born with. They don't have an understanding that it is in fact an art form. So if you're going to, be interested in learning an instrument, when you first pick up that instrument, it's going to sound a little wacky. It doesn't mean though that you can't think about the kind of musician you want to be, what sort of genre, and that there is tons of flexibility in the kind of public speaker that you want to become. So they are a lot of time they are justifying the lack of attempt to become a better public speaker by saying, "Oh, I could never do that. I'm not good at it. I wasn't born with those skills. I'm really shy." I hear those a lot. That's the first one, really buying into that false narrative. And the second is that people don't watch themselves speak. They have no real idea about the barriers that they're facing, other than, hey, I feel nervous or anxious, which is absolutely normal and reasonable. But if I really try to say, hey, give me an assessment about things that you think you need to work on as a public speaker, after watching yourself, they'll say, I never have. I've never listened to myself. I've never watched myself. The best I'll get is often sometimes I rehearse in the mirror, which is very different than watching yourself actually from the position of an audience member. And so you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Of course, it's an awkward process. All learning is being uncomfortable, but that inability to feel comfortable watching yourself is an inability to move towards confidence as a public speaker because you have to know what the audience is perceiving about you for you to do goal setting to progress or advance towards the kind of artistic public speaker that you want to become. Those are the
Yeah,
two
I'm
I would
wondering
say.
too if we can talk to sort of even like, like just at a basic level, like what's the advantage for somebody in their business learning to improve, their communication style?
Yes, being a good public speaker is not just about being a good public speaker on a stage with a million people. It's a commitment to taking seriously how you're communicating across professional contexts. A lot of times when I'm working with clients, the strategies we're using to become better public speakers, they're practicing in their everyday communication with folks, which includes reducing fillers. It means becoming more strategic in creating agenda items or being clear about what your goals are, using clear communication as a strategy. So being a good public speaker doesn't just improve your credibility and open up opportunities. It does because you'll say yes to more. You'll be able to seek out opportunities where you feel more comfortable pitching your business at a networking event or pitching a TED Talk, or doing a webinar that you want to record and share out into the world. You'll say yes to those things, which absolutely are going to be beneficial to your business. It will also increase your general confidence across communication in your business as well. So those are a couple.
Yeah, and I think just even your ability to just increase your bottom line and increase your sales because,
Yes.
it's like you can go to a networking meeting and talk for 30 seconds and get a client. I mean, that's not an infrequent occurrence for either you or I. So think about then if it's something that you can really, because it's actually harder to be concise. I think when we have less time, it's really, but think about that. Like if you can nail this, go to a networking meeting, give your 30-second what I call anti-elevator pitch, but your elevator pitch or whatever, get a client, that is a lot of power. And you magnify that up. Now you're in a room speaking to say 300 people, right? So that might be 30 clients, right? That you could walk away with there from one, 45-minute signature talk.
Absolutely. And you pointed out something which is also, I would say, a core barrier, which is people, view these kind of amazing speakers on a stage and they can't envision themselves there. And that's okay. You're not there yet. The goal of becoming a better public speaker is to begin increasing slight stressors. So it does mean, for example, feeling comfortable and approaching someone in a networking session one-on-one, right? That's an audience member. You're still going to deploy some of those techniques. And then you can increase that to a networking session of 15 people. And then you might feel comfortable in, So moving towards that overall vision rather than using that as a stopgate to say, I can't see myself on that stage pitching to hundreds of people, rather than saying, wow, this is an opportunity for me to really think about what is my business and how might I describe it confidently to one person at a networking session. These all are connected and build on one another so that you do end up on a huge stage and you feel like you belong there.
Yeah, I think you hit on something too earlier. Like this is not people don't come out of the womb, right? Being able to, step
Never.
into Toastmasters or something, right? It's like we don't, this is, in fact, I always think of like Simone Biles, right? Because you hear these commentators and like, oh my God, her gymnastics looks effortless, which is actually harder to do, right?
Yes.
It actually means that, and like that same thing is true in marketing and public speaking. Like just because you don't, see the tape holding something up, right? That's because more effort and more intention and more practice has gone in
Exactly.
to the entire
Exactly.
process.
Exactly. When people ask me like, well, how do I deliver a presentation without looking rehearsed? I say like
Yes.
rehearse more, right? You're just, and again, that's just a justification folks also use. I don't want to look a certain way. Well, then let's figure out how you look right now. And we're going to rehearse our way into you feeling comfortable in your body, which is mostly why people struggle with public speaking. They don't feel comfortable navigating their body while standing up and being watched.
Yes. I think too, and I wonder if you find this, it's almost that like people feel that like there's this, that there's something bad about being scripted, or there's something bad about being on message. The way I describe this to people, it's like if you go ask like any politician who's running for office why they're running for office, like any good politician, and politicians have literally sank because they can't answer this question. Why do you want to be president? Why do you want to be a senator? Why do you want to be mayor? That answer is probably going to be fairly scripted and the same. Now is that to say they couldn't talk in detail about any policy, or that? No, it's not to, or that it's not to say any of that. But the point is that person, that good politician, is super clear on the people that they need to appeal to, the words and the emotions that are going to appeal to that person, right? And that initial pitch is the door opener to the deeper conversation. And I'm wondering, like, if you can speak to that, like this fear that like will be too scripted, or like maybe it gets boring for me because I've said it a lot, so I need to change it up every time. Like, I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think that it's partially a fear that because people don't know what rehearsal looks like, they don't know what it means to be prepped. The idea that, when I worked in strategic communication, the idea that you would send a leader into a media interview without talking points is absurd.
Yes.
It is important on so many levels that you have clear messaging. And part of that is about the kind of gift that you're giving your audience. You're acknowledging that you want them to take you seriously, you're respecting their time, and you want to be able to know what you're going to say. It doesn't mean you have to have a memorized pitch necessarily. I've done so many presentations where people have said, "Wow, you have notes. I didn't know you could have notes." And I think you think I'm going to memorize an hour presentation? Maybe sometimes, but almost none. And so I think having notes can help you demonstrate to an audience also, like, I have prepared to be here. I am prepared to be here. I am taking your time seriously, and I want to make sure I don't miss some of these core ideas. In my opinion, it doesn't communicate like a lack of credibility, for example, the idea that you have to have notes. Instead, there's a much higher risk of kind of winging it. I don't know any anyone, I can't think of anyone who has been successful at winging it, or their own self-perception that it's been successful is likely different than the perception of an audience. If you're feeling bored about a pitch that you're giving every single time, I would invite you to work with a coach who can listen to that pitch and make a determination if it's successful or not. Because if you're giving the same pitch over and over again, the way that you gauge whether or not it's effective or not isn't whether or not you're bored with it. It's whether or not you're getting clients, you're getting reception about that pitch. So if it isn't successful, it means you should revise and it's an opportunity for you to take another look. But I wouldn't say in any way that not, notes are your friend. Notes are your friend. Notes are your friend. It will always depend on the context, how many of those notes you should have, what they should look like. But you should have an idea about what you are trying to accomplish in a 30-second pitch or a 45-minute talk.
I would rather, even at like, I'm a member of BNI, and it's one of the things that I just recommend to people, and I have recommended it to people for, well, a number of years now, I'll just say that. But for a long time, and I've had clients who've had great success with it, but part of BNI and part of a lot of things like the Chamber of Commerce meetings, a lot of different networking meetings is you go around, right? And at BNI, it's a very structured kind of referral system, right? So we give referrals to each other, we get referrals, we document all this in an app. And so part of what is all of our job to do each time is to make sure that the people there know enough about what I'm doing and that I know enough about what they're doing so that when I'm going out and living my life, right, and you say to me, oh my God, like we got a new car and our insurance rate is too high, that I can say, oh, hey, check out, my friend Serena at American Family Insurance. She might be able to quote you a better rate. But here's the thing, if I don't know at that meeting that Serena, right, what she does, or if she provides that, or she just stands up and says, hi, I work for American Family Insurance, right? So I would rather somebody stands up and reads a scripted thing telling me what I need to know to be effective. Because the thing that I care about is not if they read it off of something, right? The thing that I care about
Yeah.
is if I have the information and I'm empowered to do something with it. And I think to me, the risk is that somebody walks away mystified or confused, not that somebody walks away like thinking that you use notes or that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, notes are an opportunity for you to determine whether or not you're clear for the audience because you're an expert in your field. So winging it or not having scripted notes is a risk that you may not have thought much about who you're speaking to. Notes are your ability to say, this is what I do. And here are a couple of things about what I do that are relevant to this audience, because most folks are doing a lot of different interesting things. So scripting is the ability to say, what do I want to bring forward right now for who I'm speaking with to make sure that it's successful, to make sure that it's not confusing, because otherwise you leave and you think, one, I don't really remember what I said, especially if you have a little bit more communication apprehension or public speaking anxiety, or I missed something, or I forgot to tell them what my website was. Very basic pieces of information that it just can flip our mind if we don't have that reminder.
So we've talked about, speaking in terms of marketing and in terms of sales, which, I know for me, that has been the biggest way over the years that I have gotten clients. And I know that's been one of the biggest ways that you've gotten clients as well. And you and I have taken similar and different approaches, right? Like I've been much more speak to sell. I'll schlep myself to any room of 3 people and then close them into coaching. You do some of that, and then you also do like a lot of, paid public speaking and kind of like workshop offerings that you have, which I think are really, really cool. So this can look like a whole lot of different things. So we've talked about it in terms of like, marketing and sales. And I hope anyone listening is, realizing the power that, this can have, right, for you. So you hire Meggie to get the speech figured out and to kind of really get that strategic direction and to kind of get your skills, above par. Or below par, I think is that how it goes. I don't know, but whatever the correct golf metaphor is.
I'm not sure.
And then, right, then you come to me and we map out like the strategy and the places that you can do it at and how you can get the word out and how you get people to your events, on and on and on. So we talked about that. Let's talk about the other aspect, I think, here, which is it's not just in terms of if you can persuade someone to buy. There's also there's a pedagogy to all of this as well. Meaning that in terms of the efficacy of your programs and your products, and like the actual materials that you might be teaching or that you might be delivering, even down to like if you have a video that's instructions for how to use your product or instructions for how somebody could leave you a review, like there's a curriculum element to all of this. And I'm wondering if you can just speak to, in your experience as a professor, like the importance of this into people actually hearing, retaining, and being able to act on the information that is presented.
Yeah, that's a great big question, but I love it. I think, well, I know communication scholars, communication research as a field is really all about helping folks understand that communication is always contextual. When you're going to do any kind of talk, any kind of training, anything, and oftentimes people for some reason don't view these as public speaking. Sometimes they do, I think, but they'll view them as like I'm taking my PowerPoint and I'm presenting my information to you, which mm-mm. I'm a big advocate against oftentimes that strategy. But I think when you're anytime you're presented with an audience and you're asked to share information, even if it's not persuading an audience or it's not an explicit pitch, it's important to ask yourself, what's the goal of my time with them? How can I make sure that that goal is clear? How can I repeat it? Because a difficulty that folks have, even when you're given a lot of material, is that your talk with an audience is ephemeral. Unless it's recorded, you have one opportunity to make an impression on that audience, and audience members cannot remember nearly anything you say. So, what is the main purpose? How can you say it again and again to help repeat it for your audience? And how can you determine that purpose based on who your audience is? Who are you speaking to? What might they need? What's motivating them to be there? Because you want to speak to those motivations. What's the information that you're providing? What need does it fill for that audience? And then you can begin to build your materials that you'll provide for that audience based off of that answer. It can branch off from who are you speaking to? Why do they want to be there? What's the purpose? How much time do I have to be able to accomplish that purpose? Rather than taking materials that maybe you used in five other workshops for five other trainings and trying to sort of force them to fit into the new context that you're using or that's emerging. You want to tell a story that's useful for your audience. So you need to know who your audience is, what their expectations are about what they're going to get, where you need to start with them, and then what is the purpose to be able to help make sure they have an understanding when they leave about the value you've added to their life.
I love that. We're going to talk more about storytelling as we get to the end of this interview, because I know that you've got an awesome free gift that can really help people sort of use the power of storytelling and start to craft the kind of communication that you're outlining there, right? Which is both like intentional, thoughtful, substantive. So put a pin in it, we'll come back. I want to talk, since, to me, we've kind of covered the entrepreneur part of the show. Let's talk about the consciousness side of this show. So from a personal growth or personal development perspective, I'm interested if you can speak to what personal speaking has done for you on just the level of your own kind of inner development, and maybe some of what you see in terms of maybe the tangential or the kind of ancillary effects that people have when they start to do the work. Like, it may be very focused on, I want to do this talk to get 10 clients, but what's the kind of inner process or inner growth that people can experience through this work?
Yes. You know, when we talk about developing someone's public speaking confidence, to call it public speaking confidence is a little bit of a misnomer, because really what you're doing is becoming your own self advocate and feeling comfortable and confident in articulating who you are as a person, why what you do matters. It's such an important process, not only to feel comfortable in who you are. I think like I've mentioned, I think one of the biggest difficulties people have is just feeling comfortable in their own skin. We're so used to sort of hiding behind technology or sitting. We're skilled audience members, but we're for some reason not as skillful as seeing ourselves on that stage. So public speaking for me has really pushed me to feel more comfortable and confident just as a person in the world. And it's also given me an opportunity to really ask questions about, what am I doing? Why is it meaningful? Why is it worthwhile? Because without being able to really reflect on those questions, you could never say it in a way that's meaningful to everyone else. I have to believe it in order for me to feel comfortable asking other people too. So it has helped generally in terms of confidence. It also just helps, I think, make my work better because it requests that constant reflection. Why am I doing this? Who is it for? Why is it important? What are things I want to be conscious about as I move forward with it? Those are the things for
Yeah.
me, I would say, are the most, has been
The
the most
self-advocate
beneficial.
piece really stood out to me. I had a doctor's appointment. I don't know when the hell it was, last Friday, maybe.
Mhm.
But one of the things that they said to me is, it's so refreshing. You come in here prepared and you advocate for your own health. And I took that as like a huge compliment, because it's like, you can think about, even in these interpersonal reactions or even in these kind of other professional, like, that has nothing to do with my business, nothing to do with if I get a client, right? But it's still important. If I know the questions that I want to ask going in, if I know the attitude and the demeanor that I want to have going into what can be a stressful environment.
Yeah.
Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Even if it's just your regular checkup, just getting your blood work done, like it's an anxiety inducing environment. And so there are places where when you start to think about things in this way and start to practice them, it shows up in these other areas, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Right. When the textbook I wrote, it's called Public Speaking is Advocacy for a Reason. And you've given such a great example about the utility of these skills beyond, again, that more explicit public speaking experience. Because again, you're invited to ask over and over again, who am I talking to? What do I know about them? What am I walking into? And you're reminded that you can be prepared, that you can get information that's going to make your experience feel better. And then you're able to more clearly advocate for yourself and not rely on the kind of information that other people are giving you, that you can kind of poke around and you know what you're going, can better know what to accomplish once you arrive in that context. The doctor's office is a great example, for sure.
and what I think maybe the other piece here is um, there's an emotional and almost like a therapeutic piece to this, which is like, what's underneath that fear? Like when
Yeah.
you think like what's underneath that for you? Is that rejection? Is that I have a fear that I'm incompetent? Is that some kind of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, perfectionism? Do you know what I
Yep.
mean? Like we just talked about that with Terry the other week. It's like
Hmm.
what's underneath? Like I think the places that we're afraid, it's fear is so useful in that it teaches us something. It's showing us the places that we either need to work on. It's showing us the places where we need to go in a different direction because something is not right for us. Like there is intelligence inside of, you know, fear, right? If we're willing
Yeah.
to access it. And so I'm interested, like, for people, like, it's like, if you're stuck with this, like, why? If you like, where's that resistance coming from?
Yeah. One of my goals has always been, which might sound a little strange, I always tell students, when we're talking about public speaking apprehension, of course, fear is oftentimes the kind of, yeah, if you look under the covers, what is it? It's fear that's telling you have a fear of judgment, that your audience is going to be laughing at you, that the audience just thinks these negative things about you. So it's always been my goal to tell students, hey, you're going to be in an audience a lot. You might be audience members many more times than you are a public speaker. So if we know, if we have a fear that an audience is acting this way, we also have autonomy to be good audience members for other speakers. We can show up for other people in a way that really helps them understand that we're here to listen, we're not here to judge, that we're excited to hold space for you as a speaker and acknowledge that how we're contributing as an audience member is really beneficial. And I think that can be sometimes an important part that we miss when we talk about public speaking is audiences are a huge part of that experience. How are you, even if you're feeling a little nervous right now about being a public speaker, you can also feel empowered by showing up the next time that you are going to attend an event and still practice good, deliberate, intentional communication for that speaker non-verbally. What does that mean, right? How can you provide support? And it all helps us understand that we have control over our communication, that communication can be intentional, that we are able to, by integrating all of these different critical thinking skills, be more present, deliberate, intentional speakers, intentional communicators, even if we're in an audience.
What do you do when you bomb?
I think
As we,
people,
as I have,
yeah,
as
I
everyone
think
who has done it at all has. Yeah.
I think people are harder on themselves, right? And so again, to remember that like we are the main character in our own stories, but oftentimes we're passing through other people's. So just to kind of be reasonable about what the negative consequences of the bomb potentially meant for that audience, likely in your mind, how you're narrating it is main character energy, where other people likely are not going to have that huge, they might not have been wowed by a presentation, but we have all not been wowed by presentations. The worst thing you can do is use that as a justification to say no and instead be able to say, well, what did I do up to that presentation that seems like was an ineffective tool? What are things that I can do moving forward? Because I promise you, you likely just did not rehearse enough, or you likely kind of missed the information gathering session and assumed some things incorrectly about your audience or why they were there. And those are things that can be fixed moving forward. Sometimes if I leave a presentation and I feel like there are especially parts of it that I missed, I will redo it for myself, right? Because I want to ask myself, well, what would it resound like to do it in a way that is effective? Let me redo it so that I know moving forward how that's going to feel. So again, having those ability to do self-assessments to say, what did I do? Why might that not have worked? How can I begin practicing in the future or even right now? What do changes look like so that I don't leave feeling that way? And also feeling comfortable to ask for feedback from your audience, right? To see what their experience might have been.
Yes, I want to ask you more about that. I want to share one quick thing that I think works as an exercise here too, that comes from my childhood. You and I are both very close with our grandma on our mom's side, and she would tell me that as a child, I was constantly asking why. Now I use this sometimes, like if I'm practicing for a talk, especially if I don't have it like all fleshed out, or like maybe I've got like a kind of a theme topic-ish, but I'm not totally sure on the direction that I want to take, is I'll start to like, all of this kind of either the thesis that I have are sort of like my beginning lines, and I'll start to just stretch them out by explaining, right? So it's like if I've got claim A, why does claim A matter? It matters because of this, which is important because of this, which has significance because of this, which is explained further by this. And I'll kind of go out like out loud as far as I can get for two reasons. One, it helps me flesh out and make sure I'm including enough of the reasons why people should care. But secondly, it shows me where I am strong and where maybe I need more development in terms of my own ability to be conversant about the thing that I'm talking about, right?
Exactly.
Because like a lot of times when something's not connecting, it's like there's something else that's like missing, there's not like supported by, or there's some way in which like you don't really have maybe the kind of holistic depth of understanding that you need to feel that confidence to like convey this to an audience. You can use ChatGPT
Exactly.
for this now. And I'm just like, you can put your stuff in there and go, now pretend you're the most vicious political host on a talk show asking me the hardest questions that you could about this, right?
Yeah.
And think about how you would respond to those to kind of give yourself some exercises. Let's talk about audience feedback, because I think this is a tricky subject, because it's like anything, right? There's a degree to which we want to integrate and learn from things that people tell us, and there's a degree to which we need to disregard it and throw the party that we want to have. And so I'm
Totally.
interested in both the benefits of gathering audience feedback and how do you be discerning around like, which advice to take and which advice not to take. Because one of the things I see people do is like, they'll get one criticism about something, or one person who didn't like something on social media, or one person who like thinks they should tweak, and then you're caught in this game of tweaking and changing. And it's like, well, maybe 8,000 people liked it, but didn't comment, right? And so now so I'm interested in terms like, how do we integrate this, use this, but not perhaps be totally defined by it?
Yes. First is you want to ask, like, what do I want to know? What do I want to know? And use that as a guide to invite audience feedback based on that information. So what do I want to know from an audience? Probably not everything. Also to remember that there are always outliers. So if we think about kind of research, if you're trying to take every piece of feedback as though that person is your ideal audience member or an expert, that's not going to be the case. Again, because public speaking is an art form, you're never going to have an audience experience that is totally the same because you are a very complicated person with lots of experiences and background, and every single person in your audience is. So I think for you, as we ask ourselves, what are we looking for? And what am I noticing across, are there patterns? Are there things that are being mentioned a few times? Then you're able to kind of take that feedback and assess it for yourself because not all feedback is good feedback. Sometimes folks don't really even know, again, what you want. And so it can be troublesome to take every piece of feedback at face value, especially if you're taking outliers as the main source. The other thing is to remember that your audience feedback doesn't have to be your final feedback from your final product. So what that means is if you're able to work with a coach, if you have a business partner, if you have someone who's in a similar field, that if you're only getting or asking for feedback at the very end when you aren't able to do or change anything, then I would suggest sort of rolling that back in that process to say, who else is around me where I'm able before I get on the kind of bigger stage that I can utilize as a kind of audience to give me that feedback first and foremost.
This is so crucial. It's like the kind of both the intention that you have, right? I also think remaining open to it. It can be hard to receive coaching. It can be hard to receive criticism. It is important to remember it's someone's perspective and it's valid, right? And it may or may not be your perspective. But I do think that the way that we frame these questions is so important. I love what you said, because I think sometimes it's like we want to put up a poll on Facebook and go, should I create this product with this name, this product with this name, this product with this name? Well, first off, your audience may need you to determine that, because you're the one who has expertise. Like, they may actually not know totally the thing that they need, or we're like hand out these like evaluation forms after a talk, and it's like, did you enjoy it? Well, first off, enjoyment may or may not be the metric that
that might not be the goal,
about, right? If you're teaching neurosurgeons how to perform complicated brain surgery, enjoyment is not the goal of that presentation, right? And in fact, there are ways in which comedy or could detract from the very like thing that you are trying to convey, right? And I love what you said about asking for feedback along the way, because one way to ask for feedback is to go, hey, Meggie, what'd you think about that? And kind of leave it open-ended. Another way to go is, hey, what did you just hear me say? Or what's the main point that you, like, can you explain back to me the main point that you took from that? Because it may be that it's not translated.
Exactly. Whenever I teach, speech critique skills to students, we say the first thing you have to do is describe what you experienced for that speaker, because you can't evaluate something without being clear about what you experienced. This is a description about what I experienced, and then here's how I'm evaluating it. It's also such a nice kind of return back to what we talked about at the beginning, which is you need to watch yourself speak. You have to. You shouldn't just be trusting a random bunch of audience members. You should be able to determine the efficacy or validity of what they said based on your experience watching yourself. Because you have to be open to saying like, yep, I know that, I've noticed it. Or that ability to return to a recording of you after you've read that feedback to really see from that perspective the experience that audience member might have said. Audience members will notice things that you don't notice, and that's a gift. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with every observation, but if you don't know what your audience is experiencing because you're too afraid to watch yourself speak, you're going to be relying on those random pieces of feedback to, like you had said, making small adjustments over and over and over all over the place without feeling totally comfortable or confident about the package you're providing.
Which could make it feel kind of like Frankenstein's monster. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. It won't feel right. Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
It can make it feel like an AI generated television show or something, song or something like that. Yes. Yeah, totally. And I think that there's something there too about, there's a physical and also an energetic component that I think we don't totally understand about public speaking and emotion more generally. If you want, some complex and hard to get through academic thought on this, you can read the book, The Transmission of Affect. But just the fact that we walk into a room and we feel if like the vibe is kind of off, or if there's been an argument, or like we feel like the space is heavy. I know sometimes when I listen to people speaking, like I feel their tension. So there's a way in which you want to be mindful of like what you're going through. And I think even as a speaker, sometimes you can just acknowledge it. You can be like, I'm feeling nervous right now. I'm feeling like if there's a way in which, and that can just break the tension. I know I've heard Jewel talk about, when she's playing a concert, that she has certain songs that she'll play up until a point where she kind of feels the group kind of come together as a group. And then she really kind of goes into the performance and goes like, because she's like connected in that way. Then she asks for audience requests.
Exactly. People talk about stage presence. Right? Oh, this person has a great stage presence. And really what they're pointing to is a kind of energy, or that ability to project energy beyond yourself. I would call that a pretty advanced kind of public speaking skill. If you've never been told that you have it, it doesn't mean that you don't. It just means that you want to become more aware about how you can control the energy. Again, when I talk about public speaking, I don't talk about it as just a kind of individual act. I talk about it as creating an entire aesthetic experience for your audience? What do you have at the utility of the room, on stage, lights, music? How can you change or play with the intensity or momentum by collapsing space with the audience or expanding it, by changing your vocal rate, by getting louder, by getting quieter? There are so many things you can do if you really ask yourself, what kind of felt sense am I trying to leave the audience with? And how can I use a vast array of resources, yourself, your body included? But there are other things at your disposal as well in any context that you can try to move that audience towards that felt sense. And again,
Yeah,
that
I
goes
love
back
that.
to public speaking as an art form, right? You
I
are
love that.
trying to control the energy and you're trying to create an experience that is felt for the audience. So, what is that feeling?
Yes, when I talk about success being an energy that you can tap into,
Yes.
I'm not, we're not talking about like magical thinking. Like, we're
No.
not talking about just like mantras that you repeat in your head or like, I mean, not these things can help, but the point of those things, right, is that things like charisma, things like taking up space with your body, which activates the approach system, right?
Mhm.
Things like, as you said, like the tone of your voice, even the music or the lighting in the room, like the visual, like there are things that you can do, right? That kind of, it feels electric. It feels
Yes.
like it's magic, right? But these
Yep.
are skill sets that you can develop, expand, stretch, and learn to employ over time. Love it.
Exactly.
Let's end here with, and you know, we could have talked about this for a whole hour, but let's talk about the role of storytelling in public speaking. And I'd like you to share with people this concept that you developed, which I think is really quite brilliant, of pocket stories. So how people can kind of use that. So if you can kind of talk to the, you know, briefly how storytelling plays into public speaking, and then how people, you know, this tool that you've developed for people to kind of be able to harness that in a professional environment.
There is a basic kind of concept within communication studies because I study human communication, which is that humans are storytellers. We really like to bolster this perspective, this myth, I would say, about how humans process information by saying that we're very logical, that all we care about is reason. And it doesn't mean that those things
If
aren't
only.
important. Exactly. But really, that we learn about the world through stories, that we're interested, we tell our life in stories, right, in the form of a story, and that's a really significant way that humans communicate. And more importantly, it's a way that we connect with one another. It's the way that we're really able to existentially survive, is by understanding, seeing ourselves in other people's stories, looking back, making sense of failures in a way that can be useful, right? So how we tell the story of our life is really important when we're determining where we're going to go, when we're thinking about our own self-worth, when we think about how we can become better. All of those are just kind of, if we think generally about the role of storytelling, are incredibly, incredibly important. One of the biggest mistakes I think people can make in professional settings is this attempt to try and sanitize information by believing that we're merely sharing facts, we're merely sharing information, and that in order for me to correctly portray myself as an expert, to be taken seriously, that's the correct way to provide information. Of course, statistics and data and facts and fact checking, those are all incredibly important parts of the process. But storytelling is that reminder to say how we use that data, how we connect with our audience and our listeners is done and should be done through stories. So, pocket stories is a concept that I developed, which is just an opportunity for folks to think about how they can use stories as a means to create connection in professional settings. And so the idea of pocket stories is just that you think about developing very short stories that can demonstrate a value about yourself or your business that can again be sort of taken out of your pocket in a networking event or in a business meeting or in a presentation that can be a useful strategy for connection. For example, if you want to demonstrate how you in your company had to overcome a failure, right? Having to be able to think about when that happened and what did you do? What did you learn from it? That's a kind of one genre that I would recommend of a pocket story. Another genre is how have you demonstrated leadership or mentorship, either yourself or someone that you learned from? What's the story about how you were able to provide that mentorship from someone? So, thinking about core values or opportunities for you to highlight values about who you are as a business owner or entrepreneur experts, not by necessarily saying, well, I had 55 clients last year and I raised, this much money. That can be important, but it's just as important to say, I'm going to tell you the story of actually when I lost a really big investor. Here's what happened. Here's the mistakes that we made, and here's the changes that we've made moving forward. Right? So pocket stories
Yeah.
is that opportunity.
I love it. I think there's so much that you said there, and I wish we had time to unpack it all. But I really like what you said about it just really resonated. This kind of, we think of like this raw data, this objective, which is a useful thing if we're talking about how many miles is the moon from the Earth or something like, like something for which there is this sort of like pat and generally agreed upon scientific answer. But I think even in things, and I see this a lot because some of my work in nonprofits and some of my work in politics over the years, I think that one of the things that like we come and we try to combat this misinformation sometimes, like vaccines are going to microchip you or whatever it is, and it's this sort of like evil thing and they're dangerous. The thing about that is there is a narrative there, and that narrative does have some truth, which is that there has been a lot of corporate malfeasance in this country. There
Yes.
have been experiments on outgroups in which people were absolutely devastated. And sometimes our political leaders and our business leaders don't mean us well. So there's a narrative there, right? And one answer to that narrative is obviously the realities that that there in fact aren't microchips in vaccines. But I think that one of the things that we miss sometimes is we start calling this group stupid, as if the first off, as if the even in places where the story might be quite bizarre, the underlying need to feel safe, to feel that you can trust the doctor that you go to feel that you're part of a community, to feel, those fears and those needs are very real needs. Yeah. That story meets those needs, and thus it becomes persuasive. And sometimes I think on the left, we kind of can get it can be hard to see us from our moral perch, and we can think, how could somebody believe that? Really, the answer to that is that, like, vaccine, it's not about if there's a microchip in the vaccine. It's like when I talk to people with the vaccine, I'm like, I want you to be around. I want you to ask your doctor these questions. I care about you. I want to live in a world where, you feel good about your doctors, like as I do, right? You know that you have a choice and like, and to be like, this is that the value that I have is the same, is care and love and concern, and ultimately empowering you to make whatever choice that is. Do you know what I mean? But it's like and I think sometimes we don't tell that story around it.
Exactly.
Because we see it as black and white. But the thing about it is, the reason why we see it in black and white is also because of those stories from our culture, from our childhood, from our cultural influences, from our partners.
Exactly. We view the vaccine as a necessary part of prolonged living. I go to get the vaccine, right? Meggie goes to vaccine. COVID is happening. It's really scary. We don't know what's going on. There's all this kind of rising tension. I get the vaccine. It becomes the resolution of that tension. And, I'm narrating my also commitment to my community, right? And so we can really have that understanding always. Everything is really based in a story. Is the kind of premise. It's just about how can we tap into it in a way that we can use for our own business, but also just like you mentioned, that we can ask, well, what are the kind of stories that my audience is attuned to? What might they be relying on as also a huge part of the information that we're gathering? And, stories are evidence of truth, right? Stories are evidence.
Absolutely.
And so it's different to say, like, I'm a great leader. Okay, well, tell me a story about how. And so pocket stories are just your ability to say, I have a story that I have thought about. Again, I have prepared, that is intentional. That isn't a lie, but is a demonstration of a value.
And we have so much evidence of that. And it's one thing to just stick with the metaphor for a second here, right? It's one thing to say, well, the research shows that only 0.00 whatever percent of this is dangerous. And in fact, the fact that we know that is like, okay, whatever. I think what you said just there is so relatable in the sense of like, because that was true for me. Like, and I told people this story, and I think it's kind of shifted where they stood. It's like, when I went to get the vaccine for the first time, first off, it was in an abandoned an old shopping mall that had closed. It was the first time I had seen people like all together for a long time. So there was just this sense of like elation and community. Yeah. Then when I got it, there was this sense of relief for me that I didn't even know I was holding. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like I felt like, and so I think
out of that same fear, out of fear, right?
But just experiment. Sharing that experience can go further sometimes than Yeah. So where can people
Yeah.
get, so you've created an exercise for people, a short training and a workbook for people to develop these pocket stories, which I really encourage all of you to do. Like if you cannot right now give those stories that Meggie talked about. So your failure story, your leadership story, I want you to check this out. Where can people get it?
That's a great question. I would invite them to go to meggiemapes.com. That's the best place to be able to get that. And then, email me at meggie@meggiemapes.com if there are questions, especially if you want to move from the creation of pocket stories to really push to ask, like, how do I become a better speaker to be able to deliver these? How can we think about coaching? How do we solicit opportunities to practice them? All of those questions can be answered at meggie@meggiemapes.com.
Thank you for being with us. And, will you come back sometime?
I guess, I suppose.